Hi, I'm Cam,
And I'm Dev.
and you're listening to Criminalish, a true crime podcast where two best friends trade stories ranging from the wild and wacky to the downright messed up.
Do you love listening to the Criminalish podcast? Want to hear more from Cam and Dev? Then consider becoming a subscriber for $2.99 a month. Subscribers will have exclusive access to minisodes, Dev and Cam's live reactions to crime shows and documentaries, as well as early access to any multi-part episodes and so much more. Click the link in the description if you're interested in subscribing. See y'all in Cell Block C.
So, before we get into today's case, what you drinking, friend?
I am drinking water. I just need to stay hydrated because your girl had a few too many last night. We're not going to talk about it. So that's all I got today, just some H2O. What about you, friend?
I am drinking some green tea. This is the Trader Joe's Japanese sencha green tea. Good, keeps me energized, and yeah, it's a nice cozy cup of tea for this slightly rainy Sundays. So I feel like it fits the vibe.
Yeah, that sounds nice.
So the past couple of cases that we've done have been pretty heavy. And I know that for you, researching it is rough. But I also know for me, listening to it is rough too. And for our listeners, I'm sure that the Timothy McClain case was a tough one to listen to. It was gory, bloody, and just an overall sad situation. So, keeping that in mind, for my sake and for y'all's sake, I thought let's do something a little bit lighter for this week's case. So, today I will be talking about the case of Marcus Schrenker. Dev, have you heard of this before?
I don't think so, but I like the last name. That's fun.
Okay. You probably won't like the person, but that's okay.
God dang it.
All right, so I'm not going to give a lot of info on what type of case this is. Know that it is a lighter case, but I still do want to extend one trigger warning, and that is for discussion of a suicide attempt. So with that being said, Dev, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
We're actually going to start this case a little bit later in Marcus Schrenker's life. And the context I want to give is that Marcus Schrenker is married, and he is married to his wife, Michelle. And Marcus and Michelle met in the early 90s while they were on summer break from Purdue University. They got married in 1995. And in the next couple of years after they got married, Marcus and Michelle moved to the Geist neighborhood within Indianapolis. And if you've ever seen a show like Desperate Housewives, that's what you can picture this neighborhood as. Nice houses, very picture perfect families. And Marcus and Michelle were definitely one of these families. Specifically, they were known by their neighbors as the It Couple. And that was because the Schrenkers had one of the biggest houses in the neighborhood. And Marcus specifically had everything that money could buy. He had the nice cars. He even had a plane. And it was specifically his plane that was one of his most prized assets. He loved to fly. He had his pilot's license, so he would often go flying at the local airport. But a little bit of background on what Marcus did, why he was so successful to even be able to afford this nice house, the cars, and the plane. So in his 20s, which would have been the late 90s, Marcus began a career as an investment advisor. And specifically, he was a financial advisor who would manage the portfolios for rich people. So people saw this as, man, this guy is young, successful, has a beautiful wife, nice house. They end up having 2 kids, really that picture perfect white picket fence family. In addition to the cars and the planes, they also had multiple boats, and you would see Marcus in things like Armani suits. They'd be going on trips, really living the good life. The family that everyone wanted to be like.
Not the Armani.
The Armani. But Marcus was also described by his neighbors as having a bit of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of personality. He would have frequent run-ins with neighbors. And for example, there were multiple issues where he'd be mad that someone was building their house too close to his, or the house that someone was building used the same type of stone that his house used.
Oh, he's that person.
This man was just petty.
Yeah, that sounds like your petty neighbor from hell for sure.
Yeah, but he was also crazy because he had an issue with a landlord that he rented office space from. And I couldn't really find much detail on what the specific issue was. But one day the landlord goes out to his boat and he realizes that it's not there. He then gets a call from the fire department that his boat had gone over a dam and crashed. They could never pin it on Marcus, but it was just kind of an open secret in the town, in the area.
Wow. It's like that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, he need to go sit on somebody's couch and talk about that.
Mm-hmm. So his neighbors saw him as a successful investment banker. You know, they were a little bit wary to get on his bad side, but they still envied the success that he projected and the life and family that he seemed to have. So a little bit more about Marcus and what he was doing. In 2005, Marcus began managing the wealth of his friend Charles Kimney. And now Charles Kimney was a pilot, and he helped put Marcus in contact with a lot of his other pilot contacts. And this was an especially lucrative move for Marcus because this was just a few years after 9/11. And as a result of 9/11, many Delta employees, specifically pilots, were laid off after Delta did a big reorganization. And this forced a lot of Delta pilots into early retirements. So all these pilots were forced into early retirement, meaning that they had all this retirement money and severance pay that could be managed. So Marcus gets in contact with his friend Charles Kimney, who was one of those pilots, and Charles puts him in contact with the other pilots who have all of this money to be managed. And Marcus was helping them invest all of this money that they'd gotten.
So how old is Marcus when he comes into this amazing opportunity to manage the money of all these pilots?
Yeah, so Marcus was born in 1970, so he was actually only 35 at this time.
So he's doing very well for himself.
Right. And by the end of 2005, he was managing the wealth of over 500 clients with portfolios that totaled over $6 million.
That feels like a lot.
Yeah, and this also is his own company. He's not an investment advisor at some big company. This is his company.
That's interesting. That feels like a lot of accounts for one person to manage, even if it is your job, even if you are getting paid for it. 500 accounts just feels like a lot.
So it's possible that he might have had employees who were helping him out with these accounts. He definitely had other people working at the company, but he was the one in the driver's seat. He was making all the primary decisions here.
Got you.
And in addition to this investment company that Marcus had, he also launched another wealth management company as well as an insurance service company. And he titled this conglomerate as the Icon Group. Super snazzy name. And he marketed it as a company with locations all over the world, specifically in Sao Paulo, Tokyo, London, and Indianapolis, of course, where he was based. You'll notice with the way that I phrase that some of the things Marcus is doing might not be the most honest of actions. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, because I was really wondering, wow, he's Mr. Worldwide for real.
Right. So, like I said before, Marcus has this image as this super successful investment advisor. He has tons of clients. The money is coming in. So these investments must be doing really well, right? Wrong. So what Marcus was doing with all of these hardworking people's money was secretly purchasing insurance annuities with the investor's money in order to maximize his profit. And if you're saying, Cam, what are insurance annuities and why is that such a bad thing? Well, insurance annuities are a low risk investment that are usually used to provide a steady stream of income for people, usually during one's retirement, and they are specifically not meant to be constantly bought and sold. But this was exactly what Marcus was doing. And he was transferring his clients' money between these annuity accounts and was collecting up to 20% commission for each transfer. And one of the worst parts of this is that every time he transferred the money over, the client whose account he transferred from would get a high surrender fee. And a surrender fee is sort of comparable to the fee that you would be charged if you tried to withdraw early from something like a 401k. Because like I said, these are not meant to be bought and sold constantly, so you incur a fee if you're pulling out when you don't necessarily need to. And these surrender fees can be in the hundreds to the thousands of dollars, sometimes even exceeding $60,000.
Oh, hell no.
And he would forge his clients' signatures in order to make these transactions go through smoothly.
I find white collar crime so interesting because the lengths that people are willing to go with other people's money,
right,
is insane. It's insane. I can't believe that. I specifically can't believe that he did this with something that's actually good for a person to invest in if you use it correctly, and you just did it so incorrectly that it was just
And if you're thinking, oh my gosh, how did these people not notice that so much of their money was disappearing? Well, he lied. He continued the lie. And a lot of his clients believed him because Marcus's approach with his clients was to build deep friendships. It wasn't that, oh, that's just my investor. Let me make sure that he's doing the right thing. No, that's my friend Marcus, who's helping me by investing my money. And I trust that he's doing the right things. And if a client did say, hey, Marcus, why did I get this $10,000 surrender fee? Marcus would just say that, oh, that was just the taxes being withheld on all the money you're making. You're making so much money that the taxes being withheld on that are that high. And so the clients are thinking, man, Marcus is doing a great job.
And this is why it is so important to have an understanding of your own money. And I'm not saying to not have a investor or an accountant or anything like that. I absolutely think you should have one. But it's important to know at least the basics so that they can't do that they can't fast talk around you and confuse you and use terms that you're not familiar with because you don't know how something works. That's so gross. I hate that.
Yeah, and I even found that he had convinced some of his family members to invest in this European currency fund that didn't even exist.
Not you're doing this to the family.
Right.
It's bad enough that you're doing it to strangers, but then to do it to your cousins, your aunts, your uncles, your mama, your daddy, that's crazy.
Right. He collected over $1 million. And you want to know how he used the money? Trips, personal expenses, just to fund his life, fund his lifestyle that he uses to keep everyone jealous.
Not he was on his fake influencer lifestyle before fake influencing was a thing.
Right.
Wow. And especially to use the money so frivolously. I think that's another thing I don't understand about white collar crime is that the money is always used on a plane, a trip, a house, or something like that. it's never like the money is put into a lockbox account overseas where it'll accrue and grow money or anything like that. It's never that. It's always spent on frivolous things. And that's so wild to me. Frivolous assets are what you choose to spend other people's money on.
And the worst part is when they eventually get caught and they're charged with having to pay that money back, it's difficult because you already spent it.
Or it's in an offshore account and they can't get to it anyway.
True.
And it's especially hard because some people go to prison for white collar crimes and then they're working in prison. And I use the term working very loosely because they're paid like 10 cents a day to do work in a prison. And that money goes back to your restitution and pay back your victims. And so great, I made 10 cents because you worked a day in prison. That's going to be great for the $500,000 you stole from me.
Exactly. So this went on for a couple years, but everything starts to go downhill for Marcus towards the end of 2008. So in November 2008, Marcus's wife, Michelle, actually catches him going into a condo with his mistress, who was a woman from the airport that he frequented.
Not you stealing everybody's money and you're cheating on your wife.
Choose a struggle, please.
Pick a struggle. Come on.
After finding this, Michelle actually filled out the divorce paperwork, but she decided not to sign. I'm sure Marcus was doing a lot of convincing around, let's keep the family together. I love you. It was a mistake. And maybe she was teetering and trying to make the decision. But Marcus helped her make this decision when just a month later, on December 30th, she found out that Marcus went to Key West with his mistress after he told her that they wouldn't be able to afford to go to Florida for the holiday.
So let me get this straight. You got caught with the mistress. Got told that you were going to be divorced. You somehow managed to hit her with the baby, please, and she doesn't file for divorce. And your stupid behind can't even wait 30 days before messing it up again? 30 days? Especially after you told your wife that you can't do it? What is wrong with you, friend? What is wrong with you?
And that you can't do it because you don't have the money, but you got the money to take your mistress? That's crazy.
Of course we spend the stolen money on the mistress. We don't spend the stolen money on the wife.
Never that.
This just reminds me so much of what you said a couple of episodes back about how people will actively disrespect you in your face, cheat on you the whole 9 yards, and then all of a sudden it's time to talk about divorce and they're like, no, we can work it out, we can fix it, we got to stay together for the family. You didn't care about this family when you was out there sleeping with your mistress.
Exactly.
You didn't care about our children, our household, and me when you were out there sleeping with your mistress. So why should you care now? And especially, sir, you didn't even get all the way out of the doghouse before you had the nerve to start cheating again. Come on now. At least take a break.
Please. Like, at least give me some time to believe you again.
Right.
To fall for your lies again. Please, pretend you care.
Pretend you care. At least go ahead and serenade me, get the flowers and stuff. Or hell, if you're going to take your mistress to Key West, send me somewhere else. I know people who do that all the time. They just send their wife off when they want their mistress to have fun. He could have just did that. Think smarter.
So in the background, some things were happening that were working against Marcus and his schemes. Specifically, the previous summer, 7 of his clients who'd lost a combined $250,000 just in surrender fees had contacted the Indiana Department of Insurance to report the suspected fraud.
Ooh.
And 8 days prior to December 30th, 2008, the regulators had begun looking into his financial documents. I guess there was some time between when they reported it to when the Department of Insurance actually got on the case and then actually got access to his financial documents. But when they took a look at these documents, they found evidence that he'd been selling these investments without a license.
Now he's unlicensed.
Right. You couldn't even take care of the basic stuff.
Wow. Wow.
I feel like when there's people committing crimes, like if somebody's selling drugs and they're using some type of business as a front, they at least make sure that business has legit licenses.
Of course, because if I'm going down for the drugs. I'm not going down because I didn't repay my renewal fee this year. It's not why I'm going down. I'm not going down because the taxes haven't been filed. I'm not going down like that.
Right. So on December 31st, 2008, which is also New Year's Eve, Marcus's homes and businesses were raided by the Indiana Department of Securities. They seized $6,000 in cash, passports, titles, computers, and multiple boxes of incriminating documentation. You want to know the worst part about this?
What's the worst part about it?
While this was happening, Marcus's wife and one of his daughters were home. The daughter answered the door for the officers.
Oh, no.
And had to tell her mom that the police were at the door and they wanted her dad.
Oh, no.
And Marcus was on a beach in Florida celebrating New Year's Eve with his girlfriend.
Bro, why'd you you scarred that little girl like that? That poor baby.
So from this point, things start to move pretty quickly for Marcus and his family. So shortly after that, Marcus returns back to Indianapolis, but of course does not return home. He decides to stay in the condo with his girlfriend because Michelle is now saying the divorce is happening. The divorce is happening. And Marcus still has the nerve to say, please don't do this.
I just got my house raided with my children home, and you had the nerve and audacity to sit on a beach with your girlfriend. And you still want to try to hit me with the baby, please don't leave? Like that line is going to work?
Right.
Huh?
Like you've done anything to make me think that you are a good partner.
Right.
2 plus 2 is not equaling 4.
2 plus 2 is equaling 97.8 at this point, girl.
Listen, it's not making sense. And just a couple days after this, on January 4th, 2009, Marcus's stepfather actually passed away. And this was very emotional for Marcus because Marcus's stepfather was the one who'd really helped raise him. And so because of this, he started drinking and just exhibiting behaviors that showed that he was not in a good place mentally. On January 9th, 2009, he received a $500,000 lawsuit from another insurance company for holding on to commissions that he should have returned.
So you're just getting hit from every angle, man. And I'm not going to lie, some of those angles, I don't feel bad for you.
I don't either, especially the lawsuit.
Of course, you brought that upon yourself.
So this brings us to January 11th, 2009. And on this day, Marcus told his friends and family that he'd be flying his single-engine airplane solo to Destin, Florida, which is where his father lived. And this is just a note, not really relevant, but funny enough, surveillance video from the airport showed him doing donuts with his car on the airfield before getting onto the plane.
Sir.
He's so unserious.
He is so unserious because you can't in one breath convince me that your life is falling apart and you doing donuts in the parking lot.
Right.
All I'm saying is the multiple times that my life has been falling apart, I've never had the overwhelming urge to go, you know what's going to make me feel better? Doing donuts in a Walmart parking lot.
But also, have you tried it out? Has not been proven yet.
You know what? You're right. I'm going to make sure I go do some donuts as soon as I get off of this call.
Love it. So at 6:45 p.m., Marcus's plane takes off from Indianapolis, headed south towards Florida. At 8:23 p.m., air traffic controllers receive a distress call where Marcus is saying that the windshield of his aircraft is cracking. Moments later, he says that the windshield has imploded and sent shards everywhere, including to the back of his neck, causing him to bleed profusely. Air traffic controllers noticed that his plane was headed in the direction of military bases in Pensacola. So the Air Force deployed 2 F-15 fighter jets to try and catch up with the plane and make sure that it wouldn't hit any of those bases.
This is wild. This is utterly wild.
At 9 p.m., Michelle receives a call from air traffic controllers asking for Marcus's phone number, and all they told her was that they'd lost contact. But of course, she's starting to get worried. Over in Florida, they soon located Marcus's downed plane in Pensacola. Around 3 a.m., they let Michelle know that her husband's plane had gone down. But his body wasn't in the plane, so they were still looking for Marcus. Back on the scene where the plane crashed, the sheriff's department was inspecting the area, and what was odd was that they found no blood and no imploded windshield, as Marcus had said during his emergency call. And when the sheriff's department talked to the F-15 jets that had investigated the plane as it was flying, they find out that when the F-15 jets caught up with the plane and shined the light, the aircraft doors were already open and the cockpit was dark and empty. This was while the plane was still in the air. So the plane was on autopilot, still flying through the air. No imploded windshield, no blood, no one in the cockpit, with the aircraft doors open. That's when the sheriff department realized that Marcus was still alive and must have parachuted out of the plane while it was still in the air. In the cockpit, they found a U.S. atlas and a national campground registry. And in the campground registry, the Florida and Alabama pages were torn out.
When you said earlier, yeah, that's wild, I was like, oh, he faked this whole thing. He faked this entire thing. And that's insane.
Yeah.
That is so crazy that he did that. Yeah, this is utter craziness. This is so wild.
Yeah. Truly wild. And it honestly doesn't stop here.
Oh, goodness gracious.
So around 2:30 a.m., Marcus landed in Harpersville, Alabama, and it seems like he must have landed in some sort of area with water because the bottom half of his pants were soaking wet. So he approached a house in Harpersville, Alabama, knocked on the door, and asked them for a ride into town. In order to explain the fact that half of his pants were drenched, he told them that he'd been in a canoeing accident.
Not your lie ain't consistent. At least if you're going to tell a lie, at least tell one. It's easier to remember.
Right. So these Good Samaritans took him to a convenience store where he actually had the audacity to ask for a ride from a cop that was parked nearby and told the cop that he needed a ride to a motel where he wanted to meet with some of his friends. The cop agreed and asked Marcus for ID, and Marcus showed him his own license.
Are you stupid or are you dumb?
Yeah. So at this time, the cop didn't realize who he was because the news had not yet traveled that this person had supposedly purposely crashed his plane.
Oof. Big oof.
But the cop returns to the station, and at the station, he's getting all this information about this Marcus Schrenker character who crashed his plane nearby and was currently the subject of a search. And this is when he tells people, okay, I actually just gave that guy a ride to this motel. So the police rush to the motel, but by the time they get there, Marcus had already left.
Of course he had.
And what was really odd was that surveillance video at the motel shows him checking in under a false name, paying with cash, and then putting on a black beanie and running into the woods. He never even entered the room.
Okay. Devin conspiracy land real quick. Is anybody listening catching a vibe that he's trying to throw people off his tail? Like, I bought this room so that they will think that I'm in that room and they'll go to that room and it'll give me more time to run. If you agree with me, please leave a comment either on the YouTube video or on Spotify, because it's giving, I need to throw them off the scent.
Right. But it honestly didn't really work because they could just check the surveillance video.
Oh, of course. It wasn't smart. It wasn't successful, but it was an attempt. At least he tried. A for effort.
So this is now the early morning of January 12th, 2009. But let's rewind a couple of days back to January 10th, 2009, which was when Marcus traveled to a self-storage facility in Harpersville, Alabama. To remind our listeners, this was a day before he took his famed flight to Destin, Florida. When he got to the self-storage facility, he told the owners that he just needed to store his motorcycle, which was his beloved Yamaha, for a few days. He used his half-brother's name and ID to secure the unit and drove back to Indianapolis the same day.
So we're going with identity fraud on top of everything else.
Yeah, we are. He's just racking up the charges.
Right, you're just racking up the charges. And you know what's funny is you've committed so many little crimes at this point that if the judge wanted to throw the book at you, he can make you serve those consecutively, and now you're in prison for life because you got 20 stupid little charges.
So now let's fast forward back to the early morning of January 12th, 2009, where you're probably wondering, okay, Marcus ran into the woods, but where was he running to? He was running to the storage facility to get his bike. So he goes to the storage facility, gets his bike, and he's off on his merry way.
Where are you going, sir? What's the plan, Phil?
And the police wanted to know just that. So less than 24 hours after the plane crash, authorities were already on Marcus's trail. They knew about the motorcycle. They found his wet clothes in a dumpster at the storage facility. And the owners of the storage facility were able to describe Marcus and his bike in detail. And the investigators had a good idea of where Marcus was planning to go because he'd torn those pages out from the U.S. Atlas and the National Campground Registry. So while the investigators are hot on Marcus's trail, he's at a campground in Florida. And at this campground, he logged onto a laptop that he put into a compartment on the motorcycle because he wanted to check the news. And this was when he found out that his plan did not go as he thought it would, because his plan was that his airplane was going to keep on going and crash into the sea, meaning that they would never discover that his body was not in the plane and that his distress call was fake. But when he checks the news, he finds out that his airplane crashed before reaching the Gulf, and authorities now knew that he was on the run. He sees that he is the subject of an active manhunt, and all of his accounts are frozen.
What was the plan, Phil? Even if your plane made it to the ocean and everybody thought you died in the ocean, did you think that you were just going to become a Florida man and nobody's going to know who you were?
He was just going to go from campground to campground.
You were a prominent figure in your community. You was handling all these people's money. Like, there's no way you thought that you were just going to fly under the radar for forever. Let's think about this critically, please.
Right. So after he realized that his master plan...
Can't even say with a straight face. She
right.
Can't even say with a straight face, y'all.
So after realizing that his not-so-grand plan did not go as he wanted, he decided to email an old friend and neighbor named Tom Britt. In this email, he said that the crash was a misunderstanding and that the window really had imploded and caused him to lose consciousness. And I guess also magically fall out of the plane. He said that he still loved Michelle and he was sorry for treating her so badly, but now he was too embarrassed to return home. He said that in the email, by the time Tom read it, Marcus would be gone.
I would never minimize an attempt. It is a very serious thing. I will also point out the fact that you're still lying. Like, we don't have your plane. Like we don't know that just didn't factually happen.
Right.
Come on, dude.
So Tom, who has known Marcus for a while, immediately sent this email to authorities because on one hand, he knows his friend is a little unstable. And he even said that when he saw the news that Marcus's plane had crashed, he thought it was fake. He thought it was staged. But he also knew that if Marcus really was at this point where he had been cornered, that this attempt might very much be real and that the time might be ticking in order to save his life. So he sent this email to authorities who were able to trace Marcus's location to a general area in northern Florida. So the investigators just decide to start phoning campgrounds in Florida from the registry and ask if they've had any strange visitors. And they got pretty lucky because the first campground they call is one called Callaway Campground in Quincy, Florida. And when they asked the owners if they'd had any strange visitors, they say, yeah, there's actually a camper who's been acting strange. This guy was supposed to leave Tuesday morning, but never left, and he hasn't even left his tent to use the bathroom. When the owners asked if he was okay, he said that he planned to spend another night and would come by the office later to pay, but never came by. So on January 13th, 2009, just 2 days after Marcus's plane initially crashed, around 10 p.m., 20 officers swarmed the campground. And they approached Marcus's tent and asked Marcus to stick his hands out the tent and show that he has no weapons. And when he sticks his hands out, the cops notice that there is blood coming out of Marcus's left wrist. According to the officers, Marcus was semi-conscious, but they said that he lost so much blood that had they not gotten there sooner, he wouldn't have survived another hour. Marcus was flown to a local Tallahassee hospital to receive emergency medical treatment and survived his attempt. Back at the campsite, authorities found more than $2,000 in cash, spare clothes, toiletries, cell phone, the knife that Marcus used in his attempt, and a laptop that still had searches on it, like how to jump from an airplane and open a parachute.
Sweetie. Y'all gotta stop putting y'all damning evidence in your Google searches without appropriate context. I at least have appropriate context as to why I will have some crazy Google searches on my phone. Y'all don't ever look at true crime ever and then all of a sudden you want to know if a body dissolves in acid.
Make it make sense.
Make it make sense.
So after all of this, those around the neighborhood learned the true extent of Marcus's dealings. And one of their neighbors and friends actually found out that Marcus had scammed them out of more than $100,000.
Oh, God.
Like, imagine seeing this unfold on the news. First, you're worried because this person you know has been involved in a plane crash, but they can't find him. So you're also a little bit confused. And then you learn that he faked this attempt himself. So you're even more confused. And then you learn that he tried to unalive himself. So you're sad again, and maybe even pitying him. And then you learn that you were one of his victims too.
Not only that, but you were his friend.
Yeah.
He was a friend to you. He strategically made you care about him so that it was easier to steal your money so that you would feel all of those other feelings that you described.
Right. This person even said that they'd been around his children.
Wow.
They know Marcus and his family.
Wow. How do you do that? How do you look in the face of somebody who you know cares about you, at least, even if you don't care about them, and steal everything from them? Steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from them. Steal their retirement money. These are old people. How do you do that?
And so as they're learning all of this about Marcus, some people began to wonder, How much of this did Michelle know about? Some stipulated that Michelle was in on Marcus's cash schemes because at one point she was actually the chief financial officer of one of Marcus's investment companies.
Miss ma'am.
To counter this, Michelle said that this was really a glorified role and she actually had limited duties at the company that included things like payroll and paying the bills. Essentially, she is stating that she was a glorified bookkeeper.
To me, that doesn't help your case because if you keep the books, you should know where the money's coming from and when the money's coming in and how much money is coming in because you have to account for how much money goes out. So I actually don't think that helps her case at all.
Well, I think she's saying that she wasn't even involved with the money that was coming in. It was, hey, Michelle, go pay this check to this person. Michelle, go pay this to this person. And all this comes up because people bring up this old video where Marcus is talking about his company and he's saying, we have Michelle Schrenker, who is the CFO. We have this other person who's part of the executive suite. And Michelle is essentially saying that that video was just made to make the company seem bigger than it was. But she actually was not a CFO in any operative sense of the word.
Interesting.
So there are still people who are on both sides of this argument, but the Hamilton County prosecutors declined to file charges against Michelle for anything related to Marcus's crimes. However, during a jailhouse interview, Marcus himself said, "You were the CFO. You were my wife. You were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. You were living the good life. And all of a sudden you're saying I didn't know anything about it?"
Look, I'm not saying he's right, but I'm also not saying he's wrong. I will say I always, in general, have a hard time believing that the spouse doesn't know. There are a few occasions where I believe it, like when we talked about Darren, I believe that his partner did not have any idea what he was doing, especially because he was leaving the area which they lived. And I also find that hard to believe because, unfortunately, I have to agree with Marcus here that you didn't know. You were spending all the money too. I refuse to believe that you didn't know what was going on, even if you didn't know to the extent of what it was going on.
Right.
Like, I will believe maybe you didn't know that he was stealing millions. Maybe you didn't know that. But I don't believe that you didn't know he wasn't stealing money at all.
Another thing I think about is when Marcus said that y'all couldn't afford to go to Florida for a trip, that didn't make you pause. He can afford his Armani suits, but you can't afford the trip to Florida?
To Florida, no less. You know how cheap it is in Florida?
Right.
Especially back in 2008. You know how cheap it is to go to Florida?
Right. And he got the plane. You don't even have to buy the plane ticket. He got the plane.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm definitely on the side of the fence that doesn't believe her. But I guarantee you that the reason she never got any charges is because the prosecution couldn't prove it.
Right.
Like, his hands were so dealt in everything, it was probably harder to prove that she knew or acted with malice or anything like that.
Right.
So I could see them not pressing charges for that reason.
Agreed. Marcus even went so far as to claim that Michelle knew about his attempt to fake his death and had helped him plan it.
Oh, no.
But he actually changed his story a couple years later and said in a Good Morning America interview that the plane crash was actually an accident. And the cut on his wrist that the police were talking about was from the crash and not from an attempt to unalive himself. So this man do be lying. We really can't know what the truth is with him. But we do know that the truth is he did fake that plane crash.
Correct. But you know what I find the most interesting? And this is a personal pet peeve of mine. I hate nothing more than when people fight with medical professionals. Fight with things that are actually factual, right? So if you're going to tell me that the cut on your wrist came from the plane crash and not from your attempt, how did you survive for 3 days? Why is there no blood on the motorcycle? Why do forensics not support your version of events? And honestly, I can almost understand if maybe he is embarrassed of his attempt and wants to minimize it or act like it didn't happen. I can honestly understand and respect that. However, you cannot deny things that are so blatantly in all of our faces. And if you're not ready to address that or admit it happened, of course, take your time, do what you need to do to get to a place to talk about that. But do not sprinkle sugar on this piece of crap and call it candy.
Period. So let's get to the trial.
Please do.
In June 2009, Marcus pled guilty to federal charges of willfully destroying an aircraft and making a phony distress call that caused the Coast Guard to attempt to save lives when no help was needed. The following month, he was sentenced to 51 months in prison and required to pay $34,000 in restitution to the Coast Guard and $871,000 in restitution to the lien holder of the airplane that he crashed. In August 2010, he pled guilty to 5 state charges of securities fraud. And from this, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, which would run consecutively to his federal sentence.
Honestly, that's what I was waiting for. I was like, when do we get to the fraud cases? Because the fraud, I know, is going to put him away for a little minute. But it's very interesting that they ran those consecutively and not concurrently. That's very interesting.
I think especially for white-collar crime.
Exactly. Because how's he going to pay back that $800,000 if he's about to make 10 cents a day for the next 14 and a half years?
Yeah, and that $800,000, which is really almost $900,000, was just to pay back the person who actually owned the airplane. But that doesn't even count the $20 million in civil claims that he had against him.
What?
Yeah.
What?
And so to help repay this, most of his assets were sold at auction. All those Armani suits, them boats, the nice jewelry and watches I'm sure that his family had, all sold at auction. So from his assets being sold, most of the victims of his insurance annuity scheme were actually able to be paid back in full. But if you remember, he also scammed people with that Euro currency fund that didn't exist. And those investors weren't as lucky when it came to getting their money back.
But those investors were his family.
Yeah. So where's Marcus Schrenker now? Well, Marcus was released from prison in September 2015 and currently resides in Florida. So he might be your neighbor, Dev.
Don't tell me that. I like my neighbor. He's a sweet old man.
If his name is Marcus Schrenker, just look at him sideways.
So he didn't even serve his whole time.
No.
I hate when judges and prosecutors or whoever is responsible for this, I hate when they do that. Why give somebody the sentence if they're not going to serve it?
Right. Because he was looking at 14 years and he only served about 6.
That's ridiculous. He didn't even make it halfway.
Right.
You didn't even at least give him 50%. I don't care how good of an inmate he was. Ain't no good behavior enough for him to get out 8 years before the sentence is over.
I feel like you see that a lot with white collar crimes because they usually have the lawyers that are good enough to get them out early.
I don't know, man. I've seen some white collar crimes where people have gone to jail the whole time, like to the day.
With those higher profile ones, like Bernie Madoff.
I mean, like nothing too high profile, but like similarly got 15 years, 18 years, 12 years, and they served the whole time. The whole time in federal prison. So that's why I'm so confused here because, again, he served 6 years. We'll call it 6 years. He was supposed to be in for 14 and a half. All of his victims aren't paid. If he's living down here in Florida, he probably purposely got a job that doesn't pay him a lot so he doesn't have to pay back a lot of restitution. So how is this beneficial to society? How?
It isn't. And the worst part is, he's not even apologetic.
Of course not.
Even though he pled guilty in private, he still claims that the reason people lost all that money was because of the stock market crash, and not the fact that he was buying and selling these insurance annuities so quick that it caused all his clients to get them high surrender fees.
Of course he's not. They never are. People who commit white-collar crimes are never sympathetic, because if they were sympathetic, they wouldn't have committed the white-collar crime in the first place. But to state so blatantly that you don't care, like, it's just so annoying. It's so freaking annoying.
All right, that's the story for today. Any other thoughts, friend?
Final thoughts. I fully believe that Michelle knew exactly what was going on. I also believe that the prosecution couldn't prove that, and that's why they didn't pursue charges. Marcus, the least you could do is be apologetic in public. Like, come on, man. Even if you're not apologetic in private, just keep it to yourself. Don't go on Good Morning America and not be apologetic. But that's all my thoughts, friend. This was a very interesting case. I find white-collar crimes incredibly fascinating, so I appreciate you covering our first white-collar crime here.
Of course, I had to get something that would not have any type of murder or violence in it to give us a break from the past couple episodes.
Absolutely.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode. I would also like to thank the Swindled podcast and Dateline NBC for providing most of the material for this episode. If you'd like to check out photos related to this case, follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Criminalish Podcast.
Listeners, if you like what you hear, be sure to leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to the Criminalish podcast. And if you're listening on Spotify, feel free to leave any comments or questions. As always, stay nosy, my friends. Bye.
Bye.